The Standard Deviations podcast is a weekly production that looks at money, mind, and meaning, all through a psychological lens. Each week, psychologist and New York Times bestselling author Dr. Daniel Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest, experts in everything from finance to literature to wellness.
When was the last time you splurged on something when you knew it probably conflicted with one of your financial goals, like paying down debt or saving for future fun in retirement? Well, if you do this, you're not alone. It's because of present bias, or to use the psychobabble term, hyperbolic discounting. As humans, we have a tendency to let the immediate rewards of the here and now win out over a desired future reality. To learn more, check out the Cash Dash Dash, a planning tool brought to you by the Guardian Network to see just how much your short-term spends might be impacting your longer-term financial goals. Play today by visiting www.livingconfidently.com/play.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and I am here today with Roger Whitney, one of the finest podcasters in the whole financial space, also a community organizer, if you will, in the financial space, and himself a financial advisor. Welcome to the show, Roger.
Am I like a 2 standard deviation from average?
Yeah, but in which direction?
That is what we're about to find out, I think.
There you go. So Roger exists 2 standard deviations from the mean. You be the judge whether that's to the right or the left after you listen to his podcast. So, hey, I always like to start with a bit of a humanizing personal note. You had dinner at my house recently, quite enjoyable, ate some Thai food, and you told us about a cool trip that you're going on this year. Tell the listeners just a bit about the cool trip you're going on. And then more broadly, what do you think is the importance of travel in becoming sort of the best version of yourself?
I have 3 cool trips, actually.
I sold you short.
Yeah. I had my 30th anniversary, which is going to Italy. And then my wife and I are going to spend 5 weeks in Colorado for the 2nd year in a row and just live there. But the cool trip is probably the one that we're going to Madagascar. Not my wife. She has no interest, but a good friend of mine that lives near you, actually, are going to Madagascar in May.
That was the cool trip in question.
Yes.
That was the cool trip in question. So what are you going to do there?
Learn about Madagascar. So with this friend who we were sitting around in Alpharetta and having a glass of wine, and we were like, we should visit the least visited countries in the world. And then we said, well, let's visit the least visited safe countries in the world. And our first one was 2 years ago, Mongolia. And then Madagascar, we're staying with the M's. And we don't know anything about Madagascar. We're starting to learn as we plan the trip.
Well, I believe there's a documentary on it called Madagascar that I hope you'll watch before you go. Yes. I feel like it's a very detailed documentary about the country. So what is it about traveling that you think makes you a better advisor or a better person? How does it change one?
Well, for me, because I work with clients over 50, and although, my show is called, for clients, called The Retirement Answer Man, I'm not a big fan of the word. It's just the word that we use, is I'm doing my best to design my life how I actually want to live for a long period of time. And part of that is I enjoy travel and being location independent, and I've made business decisions to support my version of what I want my life to be, hopefully for a very long period of time.
Well, and that puts you in a good position to do the very same thing with your clients, right? I just got off another interview and someone asked me, what's the number one thing you would advise financial advisors to know about behavioral finance? And I said, look, that you can't take a client further than you've gone yourself. So you have to do this work on yourself. A lot of people read my books and books like mine with an eye to how silly their clients are and to point out their irrational behaviors. But I am a big believer that you have to model the sort of behavior you want to see in your clients. And it seems like you're doing that.
Well, and for me, I'm 52 and I'm generally talking with people between 50 and 60 in the mid 60s. So I can relate to a lot of the midlife, what is the rest of my life going to look like, internal conversations. Yeah, it's very helpful. And the things that I'm noodling on that show are things that they are as well. And so I think that's the commonality that creates that glue.
Yeah. So you recently had an article published through Michael Kitz's blog. That's, of course, a huge win. And it talks about this idea that you've developed of agile financial planning that's based on the broader agile methodology that's popular in the software world. So for those of us who are unfamiliar with agile broadly, can you give us just a brief overview of it and then tell us why you think it makes sense for the world of finance?
So real briefly, there are two major project management methodologies in software, and they parallel well with financial planning, I think. The old school was what was called Waterfall, where you tried to figure everything out at once and then put it into a plan and then go execute it. And if you're old enough, this was in effect when you were downloading the 20 disks of Microsoft Office for hours on end. That was a result of this, very cumbersome big project. And Agile is about prioritization, creativity, and iterating very quickly. So getting a viable product out there and then using the feedback and the experience to improve it. So you're improving the right thing. So that's why you update your iPhone apps every other day, because they're iterating and they're using an agile methodology. And I think that parallels really well with what I think of as traditional financial planning, which is, let's fill out this 100-page questionnaire. Let's download your entire financial life and let me go to my tower and create this huge financial plan that addresses everything and force you to sit through meetings and have all of this stuff in front of you. That's not very engaging behaviorally. It's not very exciting, inspiring, whereas an agile methodology is more of a life coaching, productivity coaching of getting lots of quick wins on things that people actually care about, which creates a nice flywheel of momentum. And hey, I can do this. We're making progress. And so that's roughly the difference.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that with respect to New Year's resolutions, right? We set these grand resolutions for the whole of 2020, when probably what we should do is set a goal for next week, set a goal for next week to make it to the gym 5 times next week, or not eat sugar next week, or whatever the goal is. And then, another and another, and create that positive momentum that gets us going in the right direction. So I want to talk, I want to dig into sort of the philosophy behind this. Your agile philosophy is based on 5 principles. I want to spend a little time there. The first of these is acceptance of uncertainty. So I'm struck by 2 things immediately. Like, first of all, it's an enormously important thing to learn to accept. But as a psychologist, I'm also struck by how bad we are at it, right? Like, so there's research on needles. People hate getting shots. You'll go, there's been research done that says, in group A, you can choose, you can choose between 2 conditions. One is an uncertain condition, like you're going to get a needle that's between 2 and 6 inches long, and you're not quite sure until the doc arrives. Or in the second condition, you can just get the 6-inch needle. You can just get the worst thing. And people choose the 6-inch needle. Even they choose the certain negative outcome over the uncertain outcome, with the possibility of a better outcome and a worse outcome. So understanding this about human behavior, understanding that we are really wired to hate uncertainty, how do you get people to accept it practically?
I don't know if you ever do you? I think we give a lot of lip service to, oh yeah, I know the future's uncertain. Markets are uncertain. I think it's a constant battle to continually bring people back to what can we do next. I find Stoicism very helpful in this regard, personally, in trying to practice it, because whether it's the markets, we know that the markets are not predictable, yet billions of dollars are spent trying to predict the markets. And we watch CNBC or Fox Business or what have you, listening to people trying to predict the markets. And so there's an incongruence between what we say we know and how we act. And then even in our own life, we think we have much more agency over what happens in our life than we actually do, whether it's health-wise or driving wise. So I think it's just a constant battle of bringing people back and walking them back from the mental tricks we play just with hardly even knowing it. I do it myself.
Sure. Now certain therapeutic methods would point out the incongruence between spoken or espoused values and behavior. So you might say, look, on the one hand, we know that, nothing is certain, but on the other hand, I see you watching, cable financial news every day. In your Agile methodology, do you ever sort of point out contradictions between purported beliefs and behaviors like that?
I definitely, and where I address it most is in myself. And it can be uncomfortable at times because I'm one of the least informed market participants for my clients out there. I believe in lead me not into temptation. I cannot watch financial news. I cannot read forecasts because I will be influenced and I'll start to go down that rabbit hole. And so I have sat with clients many a time, starting with the horrible newsletter that they read that the world's about to fall apart, and just slowly walking them back to see where they're at relative and that this is an extreme outcome. And then I find you always have to come back to, okay, what do we do with that? And then what do we do with that? And ultimately you get back to what can we do next to take a proactive step forward? Because that's literally all we have.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a constant, maybe I need a couch. Maybe I need to put them on the couch.
You need a chaise lounge. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. So the second and fourth principles I'm sort of pairing together. It's around collaboration and prioritizing with clients, which I think is a respectful way of saying, look, I'm the financial expert. You're the expert on your life. You, the client, are the expert on your life, your goals, your values, and with you as the expert on your life, you're going to help me. We're going to collaborate to sort of set some priorities around these financial goals, right? So that makes complete sense to me. It's empowering. But then again, just to play devil's advocate, because this is what psychologists are made for, we also know that people have very limited insights into their own behavior sometimes. We know that there are broad divergences between what people say they want and what they act like, or what they actually want. So what do you do to practically help that client clarify or understand their own goals and values?
I think the collaboration part is really important because I'm not wanting them to come up with the solutions, but I want them to speak into what their priorities are. In terms of all, because it's really a negotiation when you're doing any kind of financial planning. You have all these competing interests and there is no right answer. There's an answer based on what their priorities are. And I don't know their life. And them participating in it gives them power and it lets them feel part of the process rather than being acted upon. Because our industry traditionally has been set up, give me all your information. I'm really smart. I'm going to go back. I'm going to come back, wow you with all my statistics, and then prescribe to you. Sort of like the old-fashioned doctors. Whereas now, that is not empowering at all. That's just, you're at the whim of whatever they say. And just as in the medical community, in financial community, that aura of infallibility is gone. So collaboration is much healthier, I think. And then the prioritization, I think it's really my job to facilitate helping them prioritize. So we can just pick one thing to do, one or two things to do in an iterative fashion. A good example is I just got out of a few meetings today, and our meetings are run where at the end of like the first one, we had 8 action items that we had come up with. And one was, do we sell the lake house? Because they really want to sell it and it's a big asset they want to turn to productive, or do we update our estate plan? And I didn't want to go say, well, let's go do both. I said, well, which one should we do? And I let them speak into it. And then we ultimately agreed, yeah, we should get this estate plan done. It's 15 years out of date. But I think that prioritization, it would be better to get one thing done and actually do it than to get, put out more things and then have the momentum slow down, because then you feel like you've failed and it's a whole different cycle.
So estate plan and lake house are not mutually exclusive, but the idea there is that it's just sort of cognitive overload. It's too much to do, and they're likely to do nothing if you overload them with tasks. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, they're two big projects, right?
Yeah.
Each one are their own individual project. So better to get one done, even if it's a small one, than to get nothing done.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I talk to our advisors about when I do training courses is this power of collaboration. And one of the things that I encourage advisors to do is to give clients two sort of mutually agreeable alternatives and then let them choose. Because all the research, the therapy research, shows that when clients are collaborative, when clients are bought into the treatment plan, they get much better, much faster. Because we as a human species have a very strong sort of, how do I put this nicely, forget you response if someone commands us to do something like, hey, you have to do this. We don't like our autonomy being impinged upon, so we immediately kind of push back and go, well, not so fast, bud. But if we get people to collaborate, we're on the same page. It's a very, very different thing behaviorally.
I think that's really important. And I think that's an issue with a lot of financial planning, at least in my experience, is help, it's collaborative to help them see the value of saving more money or spending less. That is empowering. Being told you need to save more money or spend less will solicit sort of the response that you talked about.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk about one more of these principles. This is the principle of flexibility. I'm a big believer that, we make plans and God laughs. And I've seen that in my life again and again. You think you have these ideas, you think you know where things are headed. Life will throw you a curveball. So what's a practical, concrete example of a time when you've employed this principle of flexibility in a planning situation? And how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. So, a normal example would be an idea with people transitioning to retirement. This is our forever home. And so we're making all these financial decisions on what we're doing with the house. And this is what we're going to spend while we're in this forever home. And then what they don't realize is that they're going to be a different person when they retire. And they don't know what that even looks like, right? It's like inside the Coke bottle trying to read the ingredients. You can't read it until they get to the other side. I often say it's like Shawshank Redemption, actually, where they're institutionalized. And then when they get released, when they have time freedom, they thought they knew what they would do, but this is a whole different world. And so flexibility is usually around that time. And sometimes it relates to the house of it's a forever home until your first grandbabies are born across the country. And I've had instances where everybody was in agreement it was a forever home. And then the next decision is, hey, we think we need to move to Oregon and we'd like to do that within the next year. And that was never talked about ever before. And my job is to try to identify those seeds of those ideas before they're like, we're doing this, so we can be ahead of the game strategically. But that happens all the time. It doesn't even have to happen if you're retiring. It can happen in your 30s. My good example there, if you want one, is I'll use myself. When my wife and I were in our 20s, we both had careers and we had 2 children and we were fitting the kids into our careers. And literally it was a couch moment of, yeah, one of us needs to leave work. This is silly. And then within a year, we sold our house, moved closer to family. One of us left the workforce for a while. Those things happen all the time.
Yeah. I saw that with my parents, who thought they were in their forever home until my mom began to have health complications. And it's sort of the flip side. Just as certainly as there's uncertainty in the markets, and we need to embrace that there's uncertainty with respect to what the market will do on a forward basis, there's at least as much uncertainty in each of our lives, and we need to be flexible about these things. And a good planner can help you with that, I think. Yeah,
I think we definitely underestimate the amount of variability in our life. We think it's big in the market. It may be just as much or more in our life and what we desire, for sure.
Yeah. So we've talked about sort of the philosophical underpinnings of this agile approach. I want to talk about the brass tacks now, about some of the implementation. A couple of the first steps that we're going to talk about are feasibility and sustainability. When people understand that I'm in this world of finance, right? However, peripherally, that I'm the shrink of the finance world. When people understand that I'm in this world, they will often come to me with their financial questions, and I usually, have to point them somewhere else. But the hardest conversations I ever have are around feasibility, when it's like just the math doesn't work. It's like, I make X, I need to retire in this many years, and I'm racking my brain, and I'm like, there's not a world in which this math works. So what do you do? What is your response when people come to you with a situation that just doesn't seem feasible? How do you manage that situation?
Be honest with you, I try to make the first iteration not feasible. So, and I got myself in trouble early when I was doing this because I wasn't communicating well. But I encourage people to dream up, okay, if blank slate, let's not look at your resources. If you could have everything, what would that look like? What would your, for me, because I work with people over 50, what would your ideal after work life look like from a need standpoint, from a adventure standpoint, needs, wants, and wishes? And I say, I don't want realistic. I want to hear it, and I want it down, and I want both of you to do it separately, and then we'll bring it all together. And I tell them I would prefer that this fails. And then once they articulate that and we put some swag numbers to it, then we go analyze whether it's feasible. And if it's not, I tell them this is not a bad thing. We've gotten it. We've teased everything out. Now we can start to prioritize how to get, so we can focus on the things that you actually care about most. And sometimes they're not the things that they would initially say, because they've teased out these other ideas for what they want to articulate with their life. But you do have to get to feasible. And my role is, one, to tease out what is ideal and then help them with that negotiation, because there's lots of trade-offs. If you want to leave work early, well, there's a trade-off, right? You're going to either, you may have to save more, you may have to take more risk, you may have to spend less in retirement, or you may challenge an assumption about retirement and not think of it like a light switch, think of it like a dimmer switch, and work part-time. So if you want to leave at 55 and that's a deal breaker for you, my job is to show you all the options you have to make sure you get that. And it might be part-time work. My job is to help them negotiate. I'm not negotiating for them. I'm just facilitating it so they come up with the final solution that we can say is feasible.
So it is all about trade-offs, whether it's, trading off the idea of retiring at a certain age, the trade-off of living in a place that's maybe expensive, or, living a certain way. I think I understand your point of having people stretch too much initially, but is it like, it's almost like they discover something about themselves in this sort of hyperbolic example? Is that the idea? Or what's the point of making them sort of overshoot the mark the first time?
Part of it is there's this belief in retirement planning, especially that the math won't work. So people come in usually sacrificing more because they've been preached to in the financial press and by our industry that you have to save more, you have to work longer, you have to take more risk, and you probably, the math just doesn't work with longevity and the activity that people are doing when they retire. And so it's challenging that and say, no, let's dream big, because you only get one iteration at this, right? And especially if you're 50 or 60 and retiring, you really have a 10-year window to do all the real cool things you want to do, because you're going to get, health and injury or whatever. You may not be able to do that when you're 70. We don't want regrets. And so it's helping people tease that out, because a lot of times they will discover things that were more important to them than they were willing to admit or had articulated to that point.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So the second we're going to make people read the article, we can't give it all away here for free. The second sort of implementation principle you talk about is now becoming a bit of a theme. It's this idea of sustainability, or the idea of building some stretch or flexibility into a plan. Now, I think, if you look at the way that maybe it used to happen, or the wrong way, we would build these overly rigid, overly sterile, overly brittle financial plans and say, like, here's the playbook, paint by number, go get it. that's not useful in a world where markets are uncertain and life is uncertain. How can the average person build a little stretch into their financial life?
Yeah, well, first off, if you're younger and you're not really at that pivot point, I'm not a big believer in setting huge financial goals other than wealth accumulation. Like if you're 35, setting a retirement goal is probably not very useful. Most people don't know where they want to be 3 years from now. But for me, when I'm dealing with people that are retired, it's really going to be about change management. So we view a client engagement as not a planning exercise, but a project management exercise, an iterative project management exercise. So we help continually have those little conversations to look for opportunities and look for risks in various areas, and then prioritize which ones are the biggest levers in terms of having an impact. And sometimes the ones that have the most bling have the least impact. They're most attractive. So it's helping them identify, where to take action, and then just taking that iterative fashion, because I think lack of pensions and all the uncertainty you talk about, even a fairly feasible plan may not work. If someone's living 30 years and it's all financial assets. I always tell people the trailer story, which is usually I'm talking to people that live in beautiful homes. And I'm like, look, we're going to do everything we can and we're going to iterate. But at the end of the day, there's nothing to prevent you from having to live in a trailer, right? We can just have everything go wrong. Markets go wrong, your personal circumstance, health, expenses, inflation, and everything else. But what we can promise is if we're awake and iterating, it's going to be an incremental change, not the cliff. And people get that. People get that there is no solution. At least rational people get that. And they understand that the iteration and just they want someone to help them make lots of little decisions and be their coach as much as they want to know what their allocation should be.
Well, it strikes me, this whole Agile process strikes me as more honest. I mean, I think we, as a way of combating our own fear of uncertainty in financial markets, we come up with these rules of thumb, which are fine as rules of thumb, be it the 4% rule or anything else. But there's no guarantee that any of these rules of thumbs that have worked historically will work on an out of sample basis, on a go forward basis. And so I think this iterative process, this collaborative process, is very honest. Maybe you're scaring people to death when you're telling them you're going to live in a trailer, but no, I think a little real talk is very powerful. And I think that people gravitate towards that because they understand they're not being sold a bill of goods and they're not being sold something that's more certain than markets will allow.
Yeah. From an advisor perspective, Dr. Crosby, from an advisor perspective, I've been doing this almost 30 years. And as I've developed this for myself, it's allowed me to be the best version of myself, because literally everything I do or everything I promise, I actually control the delivery of. And it never feels that way when you're a financial advisor, because everything is always graded by markets, because everything always comes back to investments. And you're celebrated for great years and you feel like crap as an advisor. You feel like you failed if it's a bad year, even though you did nothing. And so by having this iterative process and by setting these sprints and then completing them, you can actually go back and say, look what we accomplished. Each year you can actually create your own benchmark, and it's liberating as an advisor because I actually can control this. I mean, I can fail, but I can control it.
Well, something's burned into my head. My freshman year of college, I took my first ever psychology course. It's really where I fell in love with psychology. And in this course, I remember learning about suicide rates by profession, and that financial professionals were number 2, at least many moons ago when I was in college. And I remember asking my father, who's himself an advisor, I said, why do you think this is? What do you think accounts for this? And he said, sort of the vagaries of the market. It's how much is out of your control, that your client's satisfaction or dissatisfaction is largely contingent on things that are, out of your control. But it strikes me as empowering for both parties if you just, you make promises that you can keep, and you're honest about what you can control and you can't control, and you focus on controlling the controllables, right?
Yeah, and and the more you can have clients that get that, and that is the difficult part, is you have to be in a place where you have clients that understand that dynamic, and you want to make sure there's a match there, because if they don't understand and they're still thinking about the markets, it's not going to be set up for success.
Yeah, but it's a good filter to decide who you want to work with and who you don't, perhaps, as well. So, Roger, we do something on the show, a free association. I wouldn't be a true shrink if I didn't, put you on the couch and give you a little free association here. So I'm going to throw out a word or a phrase, and I just want you to tell me the first thing that comes to your head. All right?
As long as it's not ink dots.
No. There's no ink blots. There's no Rorschach test as part of this. Yeah, and if you guys could see, you this is a podcast, you won't see this, but Roger just leaned back deeply in his chair as if to recline on a chaise lounge, ready to answer my question. So, all right. So free association. Okay. What's the favorite place you've ever visited in your travels?
Oh, it's got to be Mongolia.
Got to be Mongolia. A place that is literally synonymous with the middle of nowhere, and you went there. I love it.
Yeah,
and,
it was incredible.
As a behavioral economist too, you're just bucking efficient markets. You're going, look, efficient markets tell us to go to Paris. I'm going to say there's market inefficiencies, and there's cool stuff to see where people don't go. And I love that. Okay. Strangest thing you've eaten in any of your travels?
Camel meat and camel milk vodka
Camel milk vodka
in a yurt they call them gurs, in Mongolia. I guess that would have to still stay strange there. It was very tough meat.
Top that. Did it taste like anything that folks would be familiar with?
Rocks. It was really tough.
I was looking for chicken, but you went with rocks. You went with rocks. Okay, good. The biggest financial mistake most folks make in retirement.
I have adverse selection in the people I deal with, and it's being willing to harvest all the hard work they did. They're good. The people I end up dealing with, they're good at sowing. They don't understand reaping.
Yeah. Got it. And so then related, what's the biggest sort of happiness or personal mistake that you see people make in retirement?
Worrying about the money so much.
It's interesting. I see people like you, people like Carl Richards, even myself, who have historically focused on money, are beginning to shift their attention to sort of like, how do we take this money? If you're good at sowing and not reaping, which is, I think, a lot of the folks that financial advisors end up working with, how do you take that and buy some happiness with it? So it's just as important a skill as any of the others, I think.
I just heard this phrase literally on a meeting before this, and I think it's whether you're 20, you're 40, you're 50, or you're 60, 10% of it is an external battle. 90% of it's an internal battle in life in general. And I think that holds true here. Yeah.
There's a Yogi Berra quote for that I would mess up, but yes, it's there. Okay. So the last thing, you are prolific. You've got books, you've got a podcast. If people want to learn more about this Agile methodology and you and your work more broadly, where can people hunt you down?
Oh, wow. I have if you're an advisor and you're interested in me noodling on all this stuff, the Agile Financial Planner podcast, which is newer, where it's more of a just raw me thinking about the process. And then the Retirement Answer Man is my main podcast that I've done for 5 years. And it's all at rogerwhitney.com.
Perfect. Roger, thank you for being here. And thanks for steering us away from camel meat.
Yes, sir.
All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, and its affiliates, subsidiaries, employees, and agents, including Park Avenue Securities and the Guardian Network. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information participants consider reliable, and Dr. Crosby and Guardian are not responsible for the consequences of any decisions or actions taken because of the information provided. Guardian copyright is a registered trademark of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America. All materials are subject to United States copyright laws. Copyright 2020 Guardian. 2020-94486. Expiration 03-2022.